Welcome, everyone. This is chapter 7 of Genesis. Sorry, I did that little pause. I'm trying to see if I can bring the volume up on my laptop, but I see it goes on the TV, and that's why I don't hear it. So, yes, when you guys try to speak, I normally don't hear for some reason. The TV takes over the volume. I don't know what's happening. So if you guys have to share anything, please, I encourage you to put it in the chat because otherwise I'll completely miss it. So, like I said, we are starting off on Genesis chapter 7. Last week, our beautiful sister Jess did the study on chapter 6. So, this is just, like any good book, right? It's a continuance. You don't start the Bible in the middle or even in the middle of Genesis chapter 6, right? You start from the beginning. And if you've never studied from the beginning, I encourage you to go back. If you have any questions, I have posted each study that we've done online on YouTube. And so I encourage you to go back and to study to show yourself approved. Check everything with scriptures. Don't go by me, don't go by Jess or anybody else that's teaching. You always want to check and make sure that what we are teaching aligns with the word, not because I said so, but because you guys can see it for yourselves. And and yes, we are free to disagree. Obviously, you don't have to agree with everything we say. Again, we this is a path that is very humbling because we are always learning. We don't have it all figured out. I do believe that his Ruach, meaning his Holy Spirit, leads us to all truth and allows us to put all the pieces of the puzzles together to be able to see the bigger picture. However, it doesn't mean that we have it all figured out. I do feel confident enough to say that I do feel his Holy Spirit has led us to the understandings that we've come across. And I mean, but then again, I always encourage people to go back to scriptures and to double check and triple check, and right, and not just to stay there, right?
To get the confirmation for yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. So having said that, we're gonna go ahead and begin reading chapter 7. So if any, well, actually, Jess, if you could read it for me because you're
Yeah.
right next to me.
Okay. The
Thank you.
whole
So we're
chapter.
gonna read, yes. So we're gonna read through the whole chapter 7, and then we're gonna, go to the slides and break it down to the best of my ability, how we've been doing up to this point. So go right ahead.
All right. Then the Most High said to Noah, "Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you seven, each of every clean animal, a male and his female, two each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Also seven each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made." And Noah did according to all that the Most High commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters were on the earth. So Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood.
Let me bring it up. Hold on.
Of clean animals, of animals that are unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps on the earth. Two by two they went into the ark to Noah, male and female, as the Most High commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the three wives of his sons with them, entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, all came after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. And they went into the ark to Noah, two by two, of all flesh, in which is the breath of life. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as the Most High had commanded him, and the Most High shut him in. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle, and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. So he destroyed all living things that were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing, and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days.
Okay. So we see again, this is the actual flood, right? And the NKJV subtitles it just as such, the Great Flood, right? As the account when after all those years, 120 years to be exact, as we read with just last week, it took for Noah to build the ark and to give the warning and to send the message of repentance with the hopes that people would come. And now we are at the time of time's up, judgment is coming, and the door is closed. So we're going to see how this foreshadows, all of it foreshadows not only creation, but also the second coming. So we're going to go ahead now and I'm going to give a brief introduction to the chapter before I begin connecting the precepts. So once again, Genesis 7, it's about judgment, as we just read. It's about preservation because we see that Noah and his family, which were 8 in total, were preserved from the judgment that took place on the outside of the ark, right? And it's also about the ark of life. I know that last week Jessica was speaking about the door of the ark and how it's a representation of Messiah. And I believe we also spoke about how the tabernacle, I mean, the ark in itself is a kind of like a representation of his covering or the tabernacle, right? How they were under that covering. And precisely because of that, they were safe. So in other words, it is a representation of life itself.
Like salvation.
Yes. So the flood was not random destruction. It was divine judgment and divine mercy, a separation of seeds and the preservation of life. So let's, backtrack a little bit. We've said it time and time again, but it's important to go back and understand that this whole war was against Satan's seed, the serpent's seed, right? He was not trying to exterminate his creation because he felt like it, right? It was basically because once the Adon created, we know what took place. Now we understand, we have better and deeper understanding of what took place in the Garden of Eden. And we understand that the forbidden fruit, to call it, just as the word speaks of it, it's not a literal fruit, but a metaphor. And so when Eve and Adam partake of this forbidden fruit, we know that a seed was created immediately. And then we see the distinction between Cain and Abel. Cain, excuse me, being of the seed of the serpent, and Abel being of the seed of the righteous seed that came from Adam. Notice, however, that Adam was not righteous entirely because Adam fell, not only fell into temptation, but he failed to teach his wife correctly into not giving into that temptation and did not prevent it from continuing to happen. So he was at fault. And we see that the Most High curses Adam as a result. However, because of the fact that he was created by Messiah himself, by the Adon, he was the righteous seed, meaning he was created to the image. Do you guys understand? Of both the Father and the Son? Because remember, I'm going back in my head. Let us make man into our own image. So what happens with the serpent is that he tries to he cannot remember. Only creator, only son that had the right to become creator was the firstborn. He had the firstborn right. That's a theme that is repeated throughout scriptures over and over and over. The firstborn rights, there's a privilege there, right? Messiah had that right. So he was given the authority to create, the ability to create. Satan did not, though he was himself a God in Elohim, right? He did not have the power to create to the image of the Father, anyhow. And so what he does is then that he corrupts the seed of the Adon, of Messiah, by tainting it with his own seed, because he couldn't create, but he could impose upon his seed. Does that make sense? So as a result, I'm giving all this context in case you guys have missed the previous studies, but I'm giving you an overall picture. So we are now here in the judgment portion of Genesis, the very first wiping of the earth. And a lot of people question, but why? I understand that the earth was corrupt, but isn't the earth corrupt right now? Yes, yes, it is. And it is even more so, right? However, what you have to understand that the extermination of the creation was because as we read with Jess last week in Genesis 6, not only did the serpent inputted his seed in Eve and corrupts her seed, but we see that the rest of the fallen angels looked at the women and also impregnated them. Okay, so we now see an explosion of tainted seeds, not only with mankind, but also with animals. We saw how the sirens came about as a result of this. We saw so many things, so many connections, with the fallen angels, the Nephilim, which the Nephilim in itself are these giants that are a mixed seed. We see the story of Goliath, for example, how this seed, even after the flood, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but even after the wiping of the earth, some of that seed makes it through the righteous seed of Noah, which is how we find these Nephilim in the times of David, in the times of the Israelites when they were to conquer the land of Canaan. When Joshua and Caleb, right? Remember, there's giants in the land. They were afraid. Who were these giants? Is this tainted seed? And as a result of that, Abba wanted to cleanse what he had created because it wasn't to his image anymore. Which is why he grabs not Adam, Noah. I'm gonna go back here to verse where is it? Where is it? Or maybe that was in chapter 6. I think it might have been in chapter 6 where he speaks about that he was righteous, but also in all his generation. That was in chapter 6. Yes, yes. So we see that word generation.
Verse 2.
Oh, it is. Yes, yes. I knew I had seen the word generation here because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. But in this generation has to do with also genes. The word generation comes from the root word, you see it right there, is gene, meaning from the righteous seed. So it's not so much that they were blameless in character, but also because they were from the righteous seed. Remember, all mankind is corrupt at one point or another. They fail the Most High, right? Even David, we see examples of great men who failed him. But the point that you guys have to understand is that the cleansing wasn't so much about the iniquity itself, it was the mixing of the seeds.
Yeah.
Does that make sense now? Which is why there's so much mercy. And even in that, Abba still has mercy. But let's not even go there because he is very merciful, but people don't understand the extent of his mercy. So I'm going to begin connecting already. I want to connect verse 1 right here where we just read with Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And why am I talking about? These are words from Messiah himself. Why am I linking this? Because Messiah or the Adon here said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your households, because I have seen that you are righteous before me, right? So the ark, like I said, is a representation of life. Jessica said is salvation itself. So when he's telling you, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, is basically come into my ark. Okay, this ark of Noah is a representation of that, his covering, his rest, correct? We also see Matthew 24:38. And this has to do, we know that Matthew 24 is about the end times. When they ask Messiah, what are the signs of these days that you're talking about? And he begins to dismantle it for them. This is what he says on verse 38. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And we see a repetition of that in Luke 17:26. And again, we're going to read this over and over because it's going to sound redundant, but we're going to read it a lot. And as in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. What is he talking about? Exactly this, that people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. Is that bad? No. Eating and drinking, they did it during the feasts. Giving in marriage is actually a command. Go and multiply, right? And fill the earth. It's not that it's bad. So what he's talking about here is the fact that Noah had 120 years giving warnings to these people, wicked people, to repent, but they were too distracted with the things of this world, with the things of the flesh, with the things that had nothing to do with eternity. And that's what I believe that Messiah is saying here. It will be as in the days of Noah. In other words, you're going to have a small remnant that is going to stand firm and is going to be obedient unto death and warning the others. But there's going to also be a people that are too busy thinking about the nonsense of this world and not getting ready and not even partaking of the labor, because that's what Noah was doing. He was doing the labor of the building of the ark, right? But the beauty of it is that Messiah, the same way he promised Noah rest, he promises us as well, right? So let's take heed to the warning in the same way that it was in the days of Noah, we're living it today. Hebrews 11:7. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So, in other words, let's have the example that Noah left us with. He did not know when these things were gonna happen. He did not know when the rain was gonna fall. All that the Most High told them is build the ark and warn the people, and he did. So a lot of people may be saying, "Oh, but they've been talking about for years and years and years that the end is coming soon, that Messiah is coming back soon." But I don't see it. I don't see it happening. They gave all these prophecies that 2024 was the year that something was gonna happen, because, and I'm gonna say this again, just because your physical eyes cannot see does not mean that things are already taking place for his coming. Noah was able to understand that, and he was able to tap into the spiritual and obey. Why? Because he believed the word of the Adon. And because he believed, he moved, he did the works, he labored, right? And that's why he's mentioned in Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11 is a chapter that is a recognition to the great men and women of faith. And Noah makes it right on verse 7. It says that by faith, Noah, being divinely warned of the things not yet seen, right? Moved with godly fear. In other words, he believed and he obeyed, right? He shema. Basically, he heard the word and he acted upon it. And because of that, he became an heir of the righteousness, which is according to faith. In other words, in order for us to do anything, we have to believe first. If there's no faith, then what are you even doing, right? You're just doing a religion. 1 Peter 3:20, who formerly were disobedient when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 souls, were saved through water. And we know that this is speaking about Noah and his family, right? His wife and his children, his 3 sons and the corresponding women that they each had. And so we know that they were saved through water, but this water here, there's so much meaning to water. Water was before even the world was created. What does it say? Let's go back to Genesis 1 and recap. Yes, it says that the Spirit hovered over what? Over the face of the waters. Waters is where the kingdom resides. It's within the waters, which is why when he separates, he puts a dome and he separates, it says that he separated the waters above from the waters below. And so we know that water, what does Messiah say? I am the living water. So they were saved through water, but it wasn't just any water, guys. The water that came from the floodgates of heaven came directly from the throne. So, yes, this water does both is judgment to those that are unrighteous and is also mercy to those that are righteous. So it cleanses them, right? Like it says there, they were literally saved through the water. 2 Peter 2:5. And did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. Genesis yeah, it's up to there. Okay. Actually, no, Genesis 6:9. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man. Here, there's the verse. I know I had included it. Perfect in his generations. Noah walked with the Most High. So, in other words, he wasn't just a just man. He wasn't just righteous, but he was perfect in his seed, in his bloodline, meaning it was not tainted with the seed of Hasatan. Psalms 33:18. Behold, the eye of the Adon on those who fear him, on those who hope in his mercy. In other words, this is a psalm, obviously, but it links into this because the point of the matter is that Noah and his generation, meaning his family was saved because he feared him. He feared Abba, right? And so because of that, there was a mercy given to them. Proverbs 10, verse 9. He who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will become known. In other words, walk with integrity always, and you will have your salvation secured. That's what he's telling you there. 2 Peter 2:9. Then the Adon knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. And again, Peter does really, really good linking this judgment to come with the judgment that already took place with Noah. And that's why you see the connections there in chapter 2, specifically of 2 Peter, where he's speaking about connecting the wickedness that was in the days of Noah, connecting it back with Messiah's word in Matthew 24, and bringing it back to the wickedness that is present in our age and will be present when he returns. And lastly, no, that's it for this verse. So connecting with verse 2, and I just realized that I forgot to add something, so I'm going to add it right now because I want to be able to, we're not going to read the whole thing, but I want to be able to point to it now.
Dee was saying in the virtual she's having trouble entering the Zoom, but I don't know.
Not sure why.
Hmm.
It's the same one. Yeah. It's the same one that's on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, not sure what I clicked here. Am I on? Wait, hold on. I mean, yeah, I should be on. It's sharing my screen.
I don't know, maybe it's an issue with her internet or something.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you for confirming, Marvin. I'm like, am I on? All right, this was confusing. Okay, so going back to verse 2 of Genesis 7, where it says, you shall take with you 7 of every clean animal of wait, let me go back. You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female. 2 of each animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Notice, we're gonna break it down here. The mentioning of the distinctions between clean and unclean, and we're gonna break this down. We see that they're there from the beginning, the distinct basically distinctions. So we see 7 each of every clean animal. So they needed 7 for the clean and only a pair for the unclean. Okay. I want to go here so you guys can see Leviticus 11 is where the foods permitted and forbidden is found. Basically, this is where you see the distinction of these animals. And he tells them on verse 2, speak to the children of Yasharal, saying, these are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. And then he starts doing the breakdown of the clean ones and the unclean ones, right? I'm not going to get into that right now because once we get to Leviticus, we'll break it down thoroughly. But it's already dividing the ones that are unclean, the ones that are unclean, from the ones that you are able to eat that are clean. And why am I bringing Leviticus 11 into this study? Well, because we just read, and I have the whole thing here. I don't know why I did that by mistake, but yeah. And we also, by the way, you can also find that in Deuteronomy 14:3 to 20. It's a second witness. This is already when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, ready to conquer the land of Canaan. And it's a whole new generation that was born within the wilderness. So Moses is reiterating what he had already spoken to their fathers. And so you can find it once again, the breakdown of the clean and unclean in Deuteronomy 14. Now, Leviticus 10:10. It says that you may distinguish between holy and unholy and between unclean and clean. Though the entire purpose of unclean and clean is to set you apart, meaning what are you allowed to consume if you're holy, and what you're if you're unholy, then go ahead and eat the unclean. He makes that clear distinction, but a lot of people think that this is a Levitical temporary covenant uh law only. Okay, but we see the mention of this distinction all the way back from Noah. I just want to make sure you guys understand that. And why does he allow for the unclean to come in and only two? Well, because they needed those two to mate and continue procreating, because their purpose in this life is for the ecosystem. It's not for food consumption for us. That's why, for example, the pig, which is the biggest one that we all know, right? And even shrimp, it causes so many diseases because they're not made for us to consume. They're made to keep the ecosystem clean. The shrimp and all the shellfish, for example, are bottom feeders, so they're like cockroaches, right? And then the same with the pig. They basically repeat their, like, the food that they eat, they don't they it's basically like they vomit it and eat it again, and whatever they're eating, you're eating that and putting that into your body. So that's why the Most High makes a distinction between the holy and the unholy, the clean and the unclean. It's for our own good. So that's the reason from verse 2 you see that connection there. So let's continue. Ezekiel 44, speaking of now the new Jerusalem, because the whole portion of the prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 40s and on, you see a lot of connections with the New Jerusalem in the millennial reign, when Messiah himself comes and governs us, right? Look what it says. Ezekiel 44:23. And they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the unholy, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean. And this is millennial reign conversations. Just say Genesis 7:3. Actually, no, Genesis 7:3. I'm gonna read connecting with verse 3 over here in the Septuagint. So also seven each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of the earth. So we see the mention of birds here, right? But in the Septuagint, which, by the way, it's a much older translation, kind of like the Targums, right? The Septuagint is translated directly from the Greek, but it hasn't been as manhandled. So if you read verse 3 in the Septuagint, you're going to find another explanation. It says, and of clean flying creatures of the sky, seven, male and female, and of all unclean flying creatures, pairs, male and female, to maintain seed on all the earth. I'm gonna keep it there, and I'm gonna bring it back to now sharing my slides before I forget, because there's some things that I want to show you here. So once again, let's recap a little bit before I continue. So Genesis 7, trying to move this, sorry, mirrors Genesis 1. In other words, Genesis 7 is literally a new beginning. It's a wiping, a cleansing. And now let's start over with the righteous seed, right? So just as creation began with waters, like I mentioned, right? The Spirit of the Most High hovered over the face of the waters, right? So does this reset of humanity. The Most High is not starting over because he failed. He is cleansing what was corrupted in order to preserve his original design, which was his own seed created to his own image. Thus, this is not chaos, this is order being restored. So the ark, oh, I wanted to talk about this. See, I have forgotten already. So the ark is not a boat. Yes, I know that we view it as a boat. It was obviously something that was holding everyone together on waters, right? But if you look into the Hebrew word translated, ark literally means, does not mean ship or boat. It literally means a box,
Yeah.
kind of like the tabernacle.
Mm.
So it means a box. So the same rare word appears only one other time in scripture, which is found in Exodus 2, by no coincidence, when the ark that carries baby Moses on the
Yes.
Nile River. Okay. Yes. So that's the other time this same Hebrew word for ark is also used. So Noah preserved from worldwide corruption because why? Because he was righteous, right? And his seed was not tainted. Moses was preserved from genocidal oppression. Both float on water and both protect life. Both carry the future of the Most High's people. Noah for the new seed to be expanded and multiplied, and Moses for the seed that is taken out of captivity and into the promised land. So notice the connection there, both taken out of waters, saved through the waters, because Moses himself was saved through those waters. So the ark is not about navigation, it's about preservation by obedience.
I also want to share something about that. Now that you said that, because I wrote something similar. Like, it's so crazy how the Most High gave Noah like all these instructions, specific on like the length and the width. And even
Yes.
though he gave him these instructions. Like, notice how there was nothing about putting the steering wheel or nothing like that.
No, because
Because
it
it
wasn't
wasn't about
supposed, yes.
navigation. It was just about like floating, and he wasn't meant to be the leader. He was just meant to be the passenger along with all the beasts because the Most High was the captain. He was the
Come
one
on.
dragging them.
I love that. That's awesome. Yes, yes, yes. I love that. Yeah. So I know we always have the idea of a boat, but it's not like she said, a boat itself because it doesn't even have a navigation system, right?
Yeah.
It was like a shelter,
It was a
basically.
shelter.
Just
It was a shelter. It was his tabernacle when we like when we abide under his wings, he shelters us. It's the same exact thing. So enter the ark, right? Genesis 7:1. Enter the ark, you and all your households, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. So Noah is called righteous in contrast to his generation. Noah is called righteous oh, I put it twice. I think that was a typo. Yeah, I think not. It is a typo. I wonder what I meant to put there. But anyway, while the world embraced corruption, Noah chose obedience. The ark becomes a divine line inside there is life, order, and covenant, and outside there is judgment, corruption, and death. And that is exactly a mirror of what's going to happen in the second coming. Remember when Messiah says in Matthew 24, as in the days of Noah were, so it shall be in the coming of the Son of Man. Yes.
the ark even represents just like the kingdom of heaven.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely. Like,
covenant.
mhm.
And just like the tabernacle too. It's like the kingdom.
And
not
also
just
New
like coming
Jerusalem
to
coming
heaven.
down from heaven too. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And being saved in waters.
Covenant.
Yes. And I want to point to this picture here. I know it's kind of small and you might not be able to see the features of it, but it's basically the ark when it rested on Mount Ararat.
Mount
Ararat. Yeah, yeah. I'm like, wait, what? Did I say it wrong? Yes. When it rested there after the flood, the waters receded, right? Interestingly, it was on the top of a mountain. We know that New Jerusalem descends up top of a mountain, his holy mountain. So I just wanted to bring that picture in to add to what you were sharing. Yes, yes.
The kingdom.
Mm-hmm. So once again, seed matters. Again, I'm gonna we keep saying this over and over and over. From Genesis 3:15 onward, scripture tracks seed, which is why everything about scriptures has to do about a harvest. It has to do about the fruits of righteousness or unrighteousness, right? It has to be with trees which come from the seed, whether of the tree of life, which is Messiah, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is the serpent, right? So the women's seed, the serpent seed, Seth's line versus Cain's line, the righteous seed versus the corrupt seed, right? By Genesis 6, which just spoke about last week, the seed is threatened. Violence fills the earth, flesh is corrupted because we know all these fallen angels are now mating with the women, right? And so all flesh is corrupted, and the Nephilim are present, okay? So Genesis 7 is about protecting the lineage through which redemption would come, which we know Messiah comes from that same line of Seth, right? So the flood eliminates corruption, not the Most High's promise. Interestingly, though, we do see, and we will continue as we study, we will see how this bloodline reappears and re-merges once again. And we'll discuss that, what I believe took place there and how it happened, right? That's most likely next week or the next 2 weeks to come. So now, all of that to go back to clean and unclean, okay? Because that's what we were connecting, and I wanted to make sure I show you those slides before we continue moving on. So clean and unclean existed before the law of Moses, right?
Yeah.
Not the law itself. The law was always from the beginning. I think by now we've understood that, right? But it existed before the law given to Moses, in handwritten form. So Genesis 7:2 shows the distinction between clean and unclean animals long before Sinai, meaning when Moses was handed the commandments, right? This was not a new command at all. It reveals God's standards are ancient, holiness predates the Mosaic law, the order of Melchizedek precedes Levitical law, and we know that the order of Melchizedek is the order that Messiah operates in, by the way. He restores the order of Melchizedek once he dies and resurrects. In other words, there's no need to have a mediator. He is the mediator now. There's no need for a Levitical priesthood. In other words, there's no need for animal sacrifice through the tabernacle through a priest, because we are now operating under the order of Melchizedek, right? And so, in other words, what am I saying with all this? That if the unclean and the clean existed from before, from the order of Melchizedek, which Messiah operates in, that only goes to show that this is not a command that was done away with by Messiah, right? So thus, this was always about distinction, not legalism, which other people nowadays tend to think, oh, that's just being legalistic, right? Well, there's a reason why he made that distinction very clear early on in Genesis. You wanted to say something? Yeah. Say it loud so they can.
Their gods is their bellies.
Yes.
The person that doesn't want to let go of that is because they're so attached to the things of this flesh.
Absolutely.
Their body's dying.
And let me tell you, food is one of the biggest strongholds. When a person has a lot of strongholds like temptation and other areas, sexual sin and all the other things, it's very difficult for them to fast from food.
That's so true.
Because sometimes,
Yeah.
like, when you're in the day-to-day basis, like if you indulge in gluttony, you don't have self-control.
Yep.
So
Oh, yeah.
having that self-control and lust, like
Yeah.
addiction,
If you can, there's a saying, and I highly believe it. There's a saying that says that if you can control what you eat, you can pretty much control everything else about your flesh, like fleshly desires. And let me tell you, because people are addicted to, like you said, it's like their belly is their God. They're addicted to what they feed themselves. And that's why even our flesh manifests when we put it into a fast. Like you get angry and you get headaches and it's literally manifesting because the flesh desires food. It's very crazy, that connection. But anyway.
And also,
Oh yeah.
I'm just thinking about how too, like eating is something we do like every single day. So it's just like if
It's
you
a
can
necessity too,
control
yes.
that, it's like, the
Oh, yeah.
spirit overcoming the flesh.
Yes,
to do that.
which is why Messiah fasted himself. Absolutely. He wanted to govern that flesh that he was in temporarily.
Can
It's
I,
like,
can I share?
yes,
I'm
yes,
sorry.
yes.
No, like I always think about too when it comes to like the clean and the unclean, how like First Peter 2:9 says like we're his holy priesthood, and like the priests they distinguish the clean and the unclean. Like we're
Yes.
supposed to be able to distinguish that. Like that's
Yes.
being set up.
And it's not only spiritual. What happened? Absolutely. That's actually a good thing that you bring that up,
Yeah.
because when you see that he sends in Genesis 7, that he sends to have the 7 pairs as opposed of the clean as opposed to the only 2 of the unclean. He needed 7, which is uneven number because 1 was for sacrifices. No unclean animals were permitted for sacrifices. So the pairs had to be exact for unclean because they're just for mating. But the 7 had to be clean because not only did they need to continue mating, but also they were necessary for the sacrifices, which we see Noah doing later in chapter 8. Yes.
Clean.
Yep.
Sacrificing defiling your
defiled temple.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I want to bring in Mark 7 because it's one that it's always thrown in, as well as Acts 10. But I want to bring mainly Mark 7 because every single time we speak about unclean and clean animals, it's always referenced back. Messiah said that it's what comes out of the mouth what matters now. And there's even inserts that will say that what am I call it? That will say that in this day he declared all foods to be clean. And we see that in certain translations, such as the NIV, the ESV, but we see it in a parenthesis, so we see it's literally an insert. But when you read the context of the whole book, I mean of the whole chapter, well, the whole book too, but the whole chapter, you see that had nothing to do with clean and unclean foods. This is what I have here. It says Mark 7 does not abolish clean and unclean animals. The context is about man-made traditions, ritual hand washing, and Pharisaic additions to the Torah. And you know what? I feel like going there and showing you now myself because,
Yes.
um,
Access.
yeah. Let's go Mark 7.
Trying to defend like the Peter's vision too.
I'm gonna bring it. I'm gonna bring it into. We're gonna bring it in. So Mark 7, defilement comes from within. A lot of people will grab this and say, "Oh, it's not about what you eat; it's what comes out of you." Right? Well, let's see what was Messiah really talking about. This is what the context of the whole chapter is right here on the very first 2 verses. It's about the Pharisees coming to Messiah, right? Verse 2. Now, when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. Here's the context.
Right there.
Here's the context. Why did they found fault? This was never a commandment. This was an added insert. I mean, not an insert, an added tradition of man. This is never in the Torah, was never found in the Torah, but in their own additions, right? And so this is what they're finding fault in the disciples. It's not what they were eating, but the fact that the disciples ate with their hands unclean, meaning they didn't wash it. They didn't wash their hands. I guess they were hungry. They were like, whatever, bro, just hand it over. And they didn't care that they had a little bit of dust on between their fingers, right? But okay, fine, it's a little dirty, but it's not a sin, okay? And that's what these Pharisees were pointing out. They found fault in them because of that. And look what it says. It says, for the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. Do you see it? It has nothing to do with a commandment given by the Most High. They were holding a tradition. It's like saying like Dominican people, or no, let's go Asian people remove their shoes before they come in the house, right? It's their tradition. It's not a scriptural condemning thing, but it's their tradition. So in this way, the Pharisees and the Jews of their days were holding the traditions of the elders with that. It wasn't a sin. So that's the context right there. So keep that in mind. Verse 4, when they came from the marketplace, when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And which is a good custom, by the way, to have, right? But it's not a sin. That's the whole point, right? And there are many other things which they have received and hold, like the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels, and couches. So not only was the washing of hands, but also washing the cups, like in other words, having some hygiene. But they were holding it as if you don't do this, you are at fault and you are breaking Torah, basically is what they were saying, right? And it says, then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? He answered and said to them, well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites? I'm sorry, I'm going to pause right there. Because the way Messiah would just confront these people was just like straight up like blunt. Like, yeah, I can imagine him like, well. Well, did I say a prophesy about you bunch of hypocrites? And then he says, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In other words, they're looking at the outer things, at their own traditions, and not looking at what's in the heart, right? And then it continues. He's quoting from Isaiah still. And in vain they worship me, teaching. This is the part, guys. Teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. In other words, they're teaching as if this is part of the law, but it's commandments of men. And then he say, look, it continues, guys. Let's break this down. This is really good. For laying aside the commandment of the Most High, that you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other things you do. He said to them, all too well you reject the commandment of the Most High that you may keep your tradition. Bro, that's it. I'm done.
Church in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, guys, in a nutshell. So they'll use all this to say Messiah declared all foods to be clean. But do you see the context here? It had nothing to do with food at all. Like at all. And it even continues saying, he's quoting Moses, for Moses said, honor your father and your mother. And he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is Corban, that is a gift of God. In other words, he's pointing out like, this is the real commandment of Abba, and this is what you say is commandment, right? Meaning tradition of men. Then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother. In other words, like you tell him to do this and you're actually telling him not to keep the commandment, which is to honor the actual commandment, which is to honor your father and your mother, right? Verse 13, making the word of the Most High of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down, and many such things you do. In other words, you've been handing down this vain tradition through many generations, like dumbing down till today. Till today, right? And then it says, when he called the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear me, everyone, and understand. Shema, meaning listen and obey, right? In order to understand, you need to have an obedient heart, right? There is nothing that enters a man. So this is the part that he's telling you, hear me, everyone, and understand. Do you understand this? It's like when he tells the seven churches, like, those that have ears to hear, let them hear what the Spirit is telling the churches, right? It's the same thing. Hear me and understand. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him, but the things that which come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. In other words, this is only perceived if you're walking in the Spirit. You're not going to be able to understand this, which is why the Pharisees were not able to understand what he was saying. They were not. What he's saying is like, you guys are making these vain traditions, and it has nothing to do with, like, you are actually breaking the law because your heart is far away from him. Do you understand where I'm coming from? In other words, this has nothing to do with clean or unclean foods. And if you read in the ESV or the NIV, you see that it says like, and thus this day Messiah declared all foods to be clean. And it has nothing to do with foods. If you continue reading, it speaks of food, but in what way in this context? So he said to them, are you thus without understanding also? This is regarding to his disciples, right? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him? Because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods. And this is the part that a lot of people think, oh, he declared all foods clean that day. But he's not talking about unclean foods at all. Mm-hmm. Do you see it now? And if you even continue reading, look what he's talking about. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceits, lewdness, and evil eye, blasphemy, etc., right? All these evil things come from within and defile men. In other words, what does it matter if you're washing your hands if you're washing cups, if you're doing all these traditions, if you have all these things from within. That is the context of it, guys. So now going back to Genesis and the whole point of clean and unclean, let's now read verse 4 where it says, "For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights." Which, by the way, guys, not by coincidence at all, that those are the same exact days that that Moses spent on Mount Sinai receiving the Torah, and not by coincidence at all that Messiah fasts exactly 40 days and 40 nights. Again, for after 7 more days, I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In other words, the washing, right? "And I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made." There is something so significant with those 40 days and 40 nights. And Messiah felt like fasting it too. Just saying. So connecting with verse 4, we have Genesis 7:3. No, sorry, 7:10. "And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth." Exodus 7:25. "And 7 days passed after the Adon had struck the river." This is when we're talking about the plagues here. No, not the plagues. I think this is when Moses was, I don't remember. Anyway, let me continue. Maybe it was the plagues. 7:12, Genesis 7:12 and 17. "And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth." So we see the one maneuvering the ark here was not obviously Noah. Genesis 6:22. "Thus Noah did according to all that the Most High commanded him, so he did." That's actually connecting with verse 5, sorry. Verse 5 where it says, "And Noah did according to all that the Most High commanded him." Verse 7. Let me just check the chat really quick. Amen. Not sure who iPhone is, but yes. Let's continue. Genesis 7, verse 7. Let me read 7. "So Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood." Now, connecting with that, we go back to Genesis 6:18. "But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you." Genesis 7:1 and 13. "Then the Adon said to Noah, 'Come into the ark, you and your households, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation,'" which is why his seed is allowed to come in. "On the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark." And again, I'm not going to read it, but we had already read it. Connecting with that is also Matthew 24:38 and Luke 17:20 says that, where it says it will be as in the days of Noah. Okay. Verse 11. Where it says, "In the 600th year of Noah, in the 2nd month, in the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened." So we're gonna have some connections here. I'm gonna read through a few, then we're gonna go back to the slides. The most connections I have is with this verse 11. So Matthew 24:39. "And did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Luke 17:27. "They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all." 2 Peter 2:5. "And did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly." I know we had already read this one, but it just ties in perfect again. 2 Peter 3:3-6. "Knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, 'Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willfully forget that by the word of the Adon, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. Here is clear as day, guys, that the heavens were of old, meaning above the dome, right, above the heavens, is talking about the heavens, meaning his throne, and the earth standing out of water and in the water. Why? Because the earth is separated. Here, Peter confirms Genesis, where and then the account of creation, where he separates with the dome, right, with the firmament, the waters below from the waters above, and by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with the water. Genesis 8:2. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. This is next week when we see that the flood resides, but the connection with that is the windows of heaven. What is it speaking of? We're going to show it now. Proverbs 8:28. When he established the clouds above, when he has strengthened the fountains of the deep. This is speaking of creation, confirming the fountains of the deep being above the firmament. Isaiah 51:10. Are you not the one who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, that made the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to cross over? And again, there's so many connections with waters and with redemption, right? Ezekiel 26:19, for thus says the Adon, when I make you a desolate city, like cities that are not inhabited, when I bring the deep upon you and great waters cover you. And this is speaking about a prophecy, not something that already took place. So interestingly, I know we're not going to be covered by waters again, like it was in the days of Noah, like literally, it will be a cleansing more with fire. But I believe the metaphor still stands with the whole cleansing covering, right? Genesis 8:2, the fountains of the deep and the windows. Oh, I read that already. Wait, I think I put the Bible verses, yeah, like repeated. Sorry. So Malachi 3:10. And this is again the part that they always take out of context with the whole tithe and offering thing. But I bring it in because it speaks about in the same metaphoric way. It says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and try me now in this, says the Adon of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will be no room enough to receive it. So here's the connection with, again, the same metaphor of the windows of heaven. The same person who wrote Malachi understood that the firmament literally has windows, even though it's speaking of a metaphor, but that's what I want to connect there. Psalm 78:23. Yet he had commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven. So here, once again, we see doors, we see windows. Let me see what else we have.
Can I think of when Messiah got baptized?
Yes,
Like the voice came out and the dove. And the-
that's actually a good connection because the voice came out of heaven, right?
Yeah.
All right. So sorry, I'm gonna go back a little bit because I forgot to read this one before when we're talking about the clean and the unclean animals. So let's backtrack a little bit just to go over this when we read the Septuagint. So the verse in the Septuagint in Genesis 7:3. So in the Masoretic text, the clean and unclean distinction is applied to land animals, but not explicitly to birds, as we read, right? However, in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, both clearly identify unclean birds. So there are indeed unclean birds, is what I'm trying to reiterate. In the Greek Septuagint, it clarifies Genesis 7:3 by adding the distinction, which we read it already, harmonizing the flood account with later Torah instructions. So this shows consistency across scripture, not contradiction, but clarification. So I just wanted to add that out because the Septuagint makes it clear that yes, there were indeed clean and unclean birds from the beginning as well. That's the whole point of that. So now, going back to the windows of heaven. Yes, so here we see the biblical cosmology once again, and we see that on the firmament there are windows and doors in the firmament, which is what I believe what Genesis 7:11 is describing is literally these windows being open because the dome is sealed. And obviously, for obvious reasons, there's waters above. So think about it this way. It wasn't a simple little rain that came from the clouds that flooded the earth. It was literally the waters from his kingdom from the heavens above that perforated through the firmament once they were open. So that water from the kingdom of heaven came rushing in and flooded the entire earth. It wasn't just clouds being cloudy and like, oh, psh, psh, little thunderstorm, like, brr, brr, brr. No, it was literally the waters from above flooding the entire earth. Imagine this. It's like putting a snowball once again inside the ocean, right? A snowball. You know how the snowball is like in the shape of a dome. I always go back to that image. So picture a snowball inside the ocean, and then you crack the snowball inside the ocean. What's gonna happen? All the water from the ocean is gonna go inside the snowball. So that's basically what took place when he flooded the earth. And so here they're small. I know it's hard to see, but I kind of envisioned those waters rushing in like hardcore, like boom. I know there's been I've seen some AI images through the internet, like videos of how the flood literally looked like, how it's perceived as opposed to like the concept of just like a lot of rain. And it's intense. And I can see how it would be like that.
Yeah.
Because literally the doors and the windows of heaven were opened,
There's also judgment, and judgment's not like some little light thing.
which is why I included the Isaiah and the Ezekiel precepts,
Mm-hmm.
because it talks about the windows of heaven being open for that. So the fountains of the deep breaking open is what Genesis 7:11 is describing, right? The windows of heaven being opened. The imagery appears again in Malachi 3 and in Isaiah 24 as I read it, right? Windows open for blessing for Malachi 3 and windows open for judgment in Isaiah 24, which is what you were saying. So it's the same language, same cosmology, different purpose. Blessing and judgment come from the same authority. So Isaiah 24 and the flood motive. And oh yeah, I did put the picture here a little bigger so you guys can kind of see the idea I have with just the waters coming in through these windows through the firmament, right? And even there, it's still like not intense enough as I envision it, right? So Isaiah intentionally echoes Genesis 7. He describes earth breaking apart, waters released, and a global shaking. This creates tension with Genesis 9, where the Most High promises the earth will never again be destroyed by water. However, Isaiah's use of flood imagery points to a future judgment, but of a different kind, which is what I was saying earlier with Ezekiel as well. That even though we know the second time it's going to be cleansing by fire on Judgment Day, it's still the metaphor that still stands of the purging, the cleansing, right? The judgment. So the Most High keeps his covenant, yet he holds the world accountable, which is basically the point of the flood. And even of, the second coming. Before I continue reading, I just want to read a few other connections with verses, because I only have a few more. So verse 12, we have, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Connecting with this, I have, well, I'm not going to read Genesis 7 because that's 1 Samuel 12:18. So Samuel called the Adon, and the Adon sent thunder and rain that day. And all the people greatly feared the Adon and Samuel. Why am I using this precept? Because we see how thunder and rain is connected to the Most High. We not only see it when he speaks with Samuel, we see it also when he descended on Mount Sinai. I forgot to include that one, that there was thunders and lightnings, right? You guys remember that when the Torah was about to be given to Moses, there was thunder. So rain and thunder is completely connected to him. And all the people greatly fear the Adon and Samuel, the same way that the Israelites fear the Adon and asked Moses, please just you go speak to him, because they feared him. Because just connects with the fact that the rain that came forth those 40 days and 40 nights was literally his presence, his wrath. That's what I mean by that. We also have verse 14 where it says, they and every beast after its kind, all cattle after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. And this is breaking down the animals, how they came in. So connecting to that, we have again, Genesis 6:19, and of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring two of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. And I do want to add the following. Notice that these are land animals and obviously including the birds as well. But the animals that reside in the ocean, those stayed in the ocean. In other words, the animals that were tainted by these fallen angels that are part of the ocean remain in the ocean. The waters did not purge them because they were already under the waters.
Because they're part of the waters.
Yes. So just wanted to point that out. We do see, and I don't think I added Job here, but we do see the mention of Leviathan, the sea monster, right? Genesis 7:9, 2 by 2 they went into the ark to Noah, male and female, and the Most High commanded Noah. I completely forgot to bring in Jasher until now is when I'm remembering. But Jasher has a very interesting, and I encourage you guys to go back and read it, look it up. An interesting part in this that the animals not only just came, they would go and yield in front of Noah, and Noah would decide if they were to come in or not. Yes, that's in the book of Jasher. Yeah, that's in the book of Jasher. I forgot to add that one. So Genesis 7, well, I'm not going to read Genesis 7 again. Genesis 8:6. So it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark, which he had made. Wait, is this connecting with verse 17? Oh, this is connecting with verse 17. Sorry, guys. Verse 17. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. Yeah, that's what I was connecting it with. All right, so now verse 21, where it says, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth and every man. So once again, confirming that the sea creatures did not die. It literally says, all flesh died that moved on the earth, meaning on dry ground. The bird and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth and every man. And includes birds because even though they weren't like on dry ground, they were still part, Yes, those died too. But the marine kingdom remains, correct. So connecting with verse 21, we have Psalms 104:26. There the ships sail about. There is, oh, I did include it, that Leviathan which you have made to play there. Leviathan, the one I forgot to include was the account on Job, the precept on Job that speaks of Leviathan, and Leviathan is actually a marine creature. Notice how it says that in the book of Psalms, there the ships sail about. There is that Leviathan which you have made to play there. We also see back in Genesis 6, verse 7, 13, and 17. So the Adon said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. And the Most High said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And behold, I myself am bringing flood waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life, and everything that is on the earth shall die. We also have connecting to this verse 4, where it just says, for after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. So it just confirms that. Verse 22, where it says, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. Connecting with that, we have Genesis 2, and the Adon, Allah informed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living thing. In other words, everything, verse 22, in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life. In other words, life is not the flesh, it's the spirit that's given us through him, right? So that confirms that we are literally dirt. Literally.
And died, and it kind of reminds me of when we're dry as well, and when we're empty, like the rock doesn't dwell.
That is so true. Like, because we are trees as well, we need waters and we need his breath, right? Absolutely. Verse 23. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. Once again, Matthew 24 and Luke 11, and Luke 17 connects beautifully with this. As it was in the days of Noah, as it was in the days of Noah. I'm not going to read it again. Hebrews 11:7. Once again, by faith, Noah, being divinely warned, I'm going to read it again, of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. First Peter 3:20, who formerly were disobedient when once the divine long suffering waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which few, that is 8 souls, were saved through water. And I'm repeating these again for a reason. 2 Peter 2:5 again, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. Back to the very last verse 24. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 years. Genesis 8:3-4. And the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased. Then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. We're going to speak about this next week because that's a beautiful connection there with what feast? What feast on the 7th month? Tabernacles. Not by coincidence, not by coincidence, my people. All right, so let me go back to my slides.
I was thinking too
Yeah.
how the waters came down for 40 days and 40 nights, and how like Messiah and like Moses and Elijah fasted like 40 days, 40 nights. Because I feel like it's like about like the cleansing.
The cleansing, yes.
Fasting cleanses.
It's literally putting your flesh to die.
Yeah.
Like we were saying, yes, absolutely. I see that connection. And the fact that Moses had to fast in order for the commandments to be given to him, his instructions. Yes. Woo, absolutely. I want to read something Michelle had written before. I know it was probably when I was speaking about unclean animals. I see. Let me see. It says, crazy that he chose 7 clean. Oh, I see the connection now. Chose 7 clean, obedient, and 1 unclean, prideful. Interesting. Reminds me of how when searching for our dog and researching the different breeders, some breeders spoke on how they chose to breed based on temperament sometimes, meaning the dog's personality traits as well as obedience. Wow. The Most High chose to breed more obedience into the world after the flood than the animals which were prideful. Oh, I love that connection, Michelle. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. All right, so now going back to judgment and mercy, which are not opposites. Look at the images, guys. Look at the images. I love it. Look at this, the hand of the Most High closing the ark. I'm just like, woo! Anyway, so the flood reveals something important, which is why I have here the judgment and mercy. We're going to be judged by his law. Obviously, you see the mercy seat above this image. I love it. I love it. So the flood reveals something important. Once again, judgment is not the absence of love. Mercy is not the absence of holiness. The ark is proof that the Most High judges corruption, as shown here. The Most High preserves the righteous, as shown here as well. The Most High keeps his promises. Noah did not save himself. The Most High provided the ark. Okay? And once again, I believe he's going to judge based on his perfect instructions, his commandments. And so judgment is not the absence of love. A parent that corrects, that brings, like basically correction is judgment, right? Like I'm going to put you on timeout, right? It's because you love that person. And yes.
Like, when you're getting judged, like when you go to a court, they have a law. So like if you break the law, like you're gonna get some type of like punishment or like some time in jail. So like, in this walk, like spiritually, like what are we gonna be judged off if the law is done away with? Like there's gonna be a law, so you need to be judged based off that.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that because James which is in the New Testament, writes about Messiah being the judge and the lawgiver.
And I think it's
Oh.
look into the perfect law of liberty.
Yes,
Again,
the perfect law of liberty, a lot of people take that because they don't understand context and they'll think law of liberty lets you do whatever you want, basically. They use that word liberty as like, oh, you don't have to abide by the law that wasn't of liberty. And it's not at all. The law of liberty is literally you abiding by his commandments because you are free now to do so. That's literally the law of liberty. You're free to walk in his commandments. You're grafted in again. That's the law, the perfect law of liberty. But yes,
they don't realize that the law is liberty.
it really is freedom. His instructions bring you back to life. Literally, it says it over and over again. Keep my commandments and live and live and live. This is speaking about eternal life. Oh, I love it. You guys wanted to say anything else?
I was just
No.
saying, like, that's what it means, like, walking the light is his law. And if you don't, you're walking in darkness.
And when you don't, you get this. You see this explosion on the fire thing. That's that is to be continued. That will happen, by the way. So to summarize it all up, Genesis 7 asks us a hard question. Am I blending with my generation or walking with the Most High against it? Remember, as in the days of Noah were, so it shall be, right? The ark still exists today, not as wood and pitch, but as obedience, separation, and faith. The Most High still preserves a remnant, and seed still matters. Which tree do you stem from? Which tree? So with that, we will continue next week on chapter 8. I pray this blessed you. Have a beautiful rest of your evening or day if you're catching this later. Much shalom to you.